3 Grand Slam titles, Wimbledon champion, the first black man to win the U.S. Open. Those are the things people usually remember about me. But people also ask about the way it ended. For years, I let the trophies tell the easier story. They could explain what I achieved. They could not explain why. While I still believed I had tennis left in me, my career was moving toward an ending I had never chosen. I had already learned how to live with closed doors, lost opportunities, and defeats that followed me home. I had learned to be patient, to prepare, to come back. Then I faced something preparation could not solve, and that is the part I return to now. How do you accept the end of a career when your own body makes the decision before you do? Looking back now, I do not think the tragedy began with my heart. It began much earlier. Growing up in Richmond, I learned very quickly that tennis would not always meet me on equal terms. There were places I could not freely enter, and opportunities that were harder to reach because I was black. So I learned a certain way of dealing with obstacles. Stay calm, prepare, do not waste energy complaining, find another way forward. At the time, that did not feel like a burden. It felt practical, and for a long time it worked. By 1968, I was 25 years old and playing Tom Ocker in the final of the U.S. Open at Forest Hills. When I won, I became the first black man to win that championship. People imagine that a victory like that suddenly makes everything simple. The truth is, history can be complicated even while you are making it. Because I was still competing as an amateur, I could not accept the winner's prize money. Ocker, the man I had defeated in the final, received the financial prize available to the professional player. I had the trophy. He had the check. Was that the great tragedy of my career? No, not even close. But it taught me something. Or perhaps I should say it reinforced something I'd already been learning for years. Rules could be unfair. Doors could be closed. Expectations could become heavy. None of that had to stop me. If there was a problem, I could adjust. If someone underestimated me, I could let my tennis answer. If I lost, I could practice. If something hurt, I could endure it. Why would I question that approach when it kept carrying me forward? That is the part I understand differently now. The first crack was not weakness. It was the belief that strength could solve almost everything. Winning the U.S. Open seemed to confirm it. I had come through segregation, pressure, expectation, and a final watched by people who understood that my presence there meant something beyond tennis. And I was still standing. That became part of how I saw the game and perhaps part of how I saw myself. Control mattered. Preparation mattered. Patience mattered. So did endurance. What nobody could have known then was how difficult it would become for me to recognize the moment when endurance was no longer the answer. Because tennis had taught me something very simple. There was always another match, another tournament, another season, another chance to correct what had gone wrong. And as long as I believed that even the painful days felt temporary. But then came the losses that did not disappear when I left the court. One of them would remain with me for years because for the first time I had to confront a question I was not used to asking myself. What if preparation and control were not enough? People can look at the 1972 U.S. Open final now and ask a very simple question. How did I let that one get away? I understand the question. 4 years earlier I had won at Forest Hills. By 1972 I was no longer the young man surprising people just by reaching the final. I had experience. I knew the court. I knew the pressure. And across the net was Ilie Nastase, one of the most gifted players of that generation. The match went 5 sets. I won the first. He took the second, I edged the third, and in the fourth set I moved ahead 4-2. That is the part people remember when they study the score. I was close. Close enough that even now it is easy to imagine a different ending. But Nastase did not disappear. He changed the rhythm, stayed alive in rallies, and found a way back into the match. He won the fourth set, then the fifth. The final score went beside his name, and I walked away as the runner-up. I am not saying this is an excuse. There were things I could have done better. When you are ahead that late in a major final, you have to accept responsibility for not finishing it. I could have been more decisive at certain moments. I could have protected the advantage better. A champion has to be able to say that without hiding behind the opponent, the conditions, or the occasion. But it was not a collapse in the way people sometimes imagine a collapse. It was a match that slowly moved away from me while a very talented opponent kept finding answers. And that distinction mattered, because My whole life in tennis had taught me to believe that preparation gave me control, and if I studied enough, stayed calm enough, and managed myself carefully enough, there would usually be a way through. So what do you do when you have prepared, when you are ahead, when the opportunity is right there and it still disappears? That question stayed with me longer than the score. After the match, there was no dramatic scene, no broken racket, no public explosion. That was not how I handled disappointment. I packed it away as I had learned to do with many things, and kept moving. From the outside, that could look like acceptance. It was not quite that simple. A loss like that leaves you with small moments, a point you wish you'd played differently, a decision you replay because the alternative seems so obvious afterward, and perhaps most dangerous of all, the belief that if you get another chance, you will fix everything. I still believed in another chance. That belief would eventually take me to Wimbledon and one of the greatest victories of my career. But the 1972 final left something behind. It taught me that control has limits, and for a man who had spent his life surviving by controlling what he could, that was not an easy lesson. The match ended in 5 sets. What followed was the expectation that I would always carry defeat the same way I carried everything else, quietly. For years, people had another way of describing me. Calm, controlled, sometimes too controlled. There were commentators who wondered whether I had enough fire, whether I wanted victory badly enough because I did not show anger the way some other players did. I can understand why they thought that. If you watched me from the stands, you usually did not see many arguments. You did not see rackets being thrown. You did not see me turn every disappointment into a public performance. But what nobody understood was that I had learned that behavior long before I became a champion. When I was young, Dr. Walter Johnson helped shape the way I carried myself on a tennis court. He had also worked with Althea Gibson, and he understood something I was still learning. For a black player entering tournaments that had not always welcomed people who looked like us, behavior could carry consequences beyond one match. He taught us to be careful. Do not give anyone an excuse. Do not argue over every close call. Carry yourself in a way that leaves them nothing to use against you. That lesson stayed with me. People could see composure and call it personality. For me, it had first been protection, and once something protects you for long enough, it becomes difficult to separate it from who you are. Was there a price for that? Of course. There were times when my silence probably made me harder to understand. When I lost, I often looked much the same as when I won. When something bothered me, my instinct was rarely to hand that feeling to everyone watching. I have to accept my part in that. If you show people very little, you cannot be surprised when they fill in the empty spaces themselves. Some decided I was distant. Some thought I lacked emotion. Others believed that because I remained composed, disappointment simply did not reach me as deeply. They were seeing the reaction. They were not seeing what created it. And tennis kept rewarding that control. I could stand across from an opponent who was trying to change the rhythm of a match and remain patient. I could lose an important match and return to work. I could enter places where I understood that my presence meant more than an ordinary sporting appearance and still concentrate on the next ball. How could I see control as anything other than strength? Even my greatest victories seemed to confirm it. Years after that painful final against Nastase, I would reach Wimbledon against Jimmy Connors, younger, favored, powerful, and certain of the way he wanted the match to be played. I did not beat him by becoming louder. I beat him by thinking, by changing pace, by refusing to play the match he expected. That victory strengthened an old belief in me. When circumstances changed, I could adjust. When something became difficult, I could find another solution. Hall of Fame records Ashe's Wimbledon victory over the heavily favored Connors in 1975 as one of the defining achievements of his career. For most of my life, that belief was useful, maybe even necessary. But there is a difference between controlling your response to a problem and controlling the problem itself. I did not always recognize that difference. Why would I? Tennis had spent years teaching me that discipline could rescue a bad situation, so I kept doing what I knew. Stay calm, assess it, keep moving. That works beautifully when there is another point to play. The trouble begins when there is not. For most of my career, when something went wrong, I knew what to do. Work. That answer had carried me through almost everything. In 1977, injuries took much of my season away from me. My ranking fell badly. For an athlete in his 30s, that can look like the beginning of the end. People start talking about age, and they start wondering whether the game has moved on without you. But I came back. By the following year, I had worked my way back among the leading players again. I was 35, and I was still competing at a level that gave me reason to plan for more tennis. I was not preparing a farewell. I was thinking about playing for several more years. That matters to me now, because there is a difference between knowing the end is coming and having the end arrive before you have even begun to say goodbye. For years I had treated my body the way athletes are trained to treat almost every problem. If something was weak, strengthen it. If something hurt, recover and return. If your level dropped, practice until it came back. I knew that language. Then in July of 1979, while taking part in a tennis clinic in New York, I suffered a heart attack. There was no opponent across the net, no bad call to argue with, no tactical adjustment to make. Just a fact I had to confront. I was 36 years old. For someone who had spent so much of his life measuring himself through physical preparation, that kind of news forces a different conversation. But even then, the old habits were still there. Doctors treated me. I went through a quadruple bypass operation in December, and the possibility of returning to professional tennis was not immediately gone. That sounds almost predictable when I say it now. Of course I wanted another way forward. Had that not been the pattern of my entire life? A closed door meant finding another door. A defeat meant preparing for another tournament. An injury meant rehabilitation. Something went wrong and I looked for the work required to correct it. So why should this have been different? That was the question I was still learning how to answer. After the operation, I tried to move toward an athletic life again. Then while jogging during a trip, the chest pain returned. I went back for medical evaluation. This time the message was becoming harder to negotiate with. You can change a serve. You can change a strategy. You can change a training schedule. There are things you cannot bargain with simply because you have spent your life being disciplined. That was new to me. And it was frightening in a very particular way, not because I thought tennis was the only thing in my life, but because the decision was no longer entirely mine. What is an athlete supposed to do with that? We are trained to believe that effort matters. In most cases it does. That belief is necessary. Without it, you would never survive the losses, the travel, the injuries, or the years of repetition required to become good. But effort and control are not the same thing. I had confused them for a long time. In April of 1980, I retired from competitive tennis. I was 36. There was no final season built around saying goodbye. No long countdown in which I could walk onto each court knowing it might be my last visit. I had planned to continue, and then circumstances changed. What was possible? For somebody else, retirement might have felt like choosing the right moment. For me, it felt different. And I need to be careful here. I had already received more from tennis than I could have imagined as a boy in Richmond. 3 major singles championships, Davis Cup memories, Wimbledon, friends, a life that reached far beyond a tennis court. I knew that. Gratitude and loss can exist at the same time. The hardest part was not admitting that my playing career had ended. It was understanding that nothing I had used to build that career could give me the decision back. Not another hour of practice, not greater patience, not better preparation. For the first time, the quality I had trusted all my life had reached its limit. And by then, the question was no longer whether I could win another tournament. It was what I had really lost when I was no longer allowed to decide when to stop. Looking back now, I understand why people measure a tennis life the way they do. They count championships. They remember Wimbledon. They remember the US Open. They remember the finals you won and the ones you let slip away. I understand that. I can live with the matches I lost. I can live with 1972. I had an opportunity against Nastase and I did not finish it. I can accept that. I can even accept the strange contradictions that came with winning the closed doors, the rules and the years when being composed was sometimes mistaken for not caring enough. Those things belong to my career, but they are not what stayed with me most. Not another trophy. The loss of being able to choose when I was finished, that is the answer I could not give so easily when people asked how my career ended. For most of my life, tennis taught me that there was always another chance to respond. Lose on Sunday, go back to work on Monday, get hurt, recover, fall behind, change something. If a door closed, find another entrance. I built a career believing that, and for a long time I was right. Then my body made a decision that preparation could not reverse. That was difficult to accept because I was still thinking like a player. I was still looking for the next adjustment. There was not one. So how do you accept an ending you did not choose? Slowly. You stop asking what you could have fixed. You stop treating retirement like another match you failed to win. And eventually you understand that leaving the court did not erase what happened on it. I just wish I had known when I was playing my last chapter I always believed there would be another match, until there wasn't.